4,000 years ago, an Egyptian woman walked into a physician's chambers and asked for something that would stop her from getting pregnant, and the physician had an answer, not a vague herbal suggestion, an actual prescription written down with specific ingredients and instructions. This happened thousands of years before anyone understood hormones, before anyone understood ovulation, before anyone even understood how conception actually worked. And yet birth control, real, deliberate, sometimes startlingly effective birth control, has existed for almost as long as human civilization itself. Most people assume contraception is a modern invention, something that arrived with the birth control pill in the 1960s. The truth is the opposite. Every civilization that has ever been studied by archaeologists and historians has left behind some form of evidence that people were actively trying to control fertility. The methods ranged from genuinely clever to dangerously toxic, and the story of how they evolved tells us as much about ancient science as it does about ancient desperation. Let's start in Egypt, because the evidence there is the oldest and most detailed. The Ebers Papyrus, an Egyptian medical text dating to roughly 1550 BCE, contains what many historians consider the oldest written contraceptive recipes in human history. One method instructed women to mix crocodile dung with fermented dough and use it as a vaginal suppository. To modern ears, this sounds absurd, even comedic, but the science behind it is not as crazy as it sounds. Crocodile dung is alkaline. Combined with fermented material, it would have created an acidic, hostile barrier environment inside the vagina, similar in concept to modern spermicidal gels, which also work by altering vaginal pH and creating a physical barrier. It almost certainly was not as effective as a modern method. But it was not random superstition either. It was an attempt at applied biology built entirely through trial and error over generations. Another Egyptian text, the Kahun Papyrus, dated even earlier to around 1850 BCE, describes a different approach. A mixture of crushed acacia leaves combined with dates and honey formed into a pessary and inserted before intercourse. Modern researchers have actually tested this. Acacia produces lactic acid when it ferments, the exact same spermicidal compound used in some contraceptive gels today. Egyptian women 4,000 years ago had stumbled onto a real, scientifically valid spermicide. Greece and Rome took a different approach entirely. Their preferred method was a plant called silphium. Silphium grew almost exclusively along a narrow strip of coastline near the ancient city of Cyrene in what is now Libya. Ancient writers described it as remarkably effective at preventing pregnancy, and demand for it was so enormous that it became one of the most valuable plants in the ancient Mediterranean world. It was depicted on coins, it was taxed by governments. The Roman naturalist Pliny the Elder wrote about its value and its uses extensively, and then it disappeared completely. Silphium was harvested into extinction sometime around the 1st century CE. It is the only plant in recorded history believed to have been driven extinct due to its use as a contraceptive. We do not know exactly how it worked, because no living specimen has survived for modern scientists to study. We only have the writings of ancient physicians describing women drinking a small dose of its sap dissolved in liquid once a month, after which menstruation would begin and pregnancy would not occur. The Greek physician Soranus, writing in the 2nd century CE, also documented other methods used by Roman women. He recommended drinking a copper-based solution and described early forms of barrier contraception, including the use of wool soaked in vinegar or other astringent solutions, inserted before intercourse to block sperm and create a hostile environment, conceptually similar to a diaphragm centuries before that device was invented. Ancient China developed an entirely different philosophy of contraception, rooted in its existing medical tradition. Traditional Chinese medicine described methods involving mercury and lead consumed to prevent pregnancy. These methods worked in the sense that heavy metal toxicity does disrupt fertility. They also caused severe harm, organ damage, and in some cases death. This is one of the darker threads running through the history of contraception. Many ancient methods that were technically effective were effective because they were poisoning the body, and the line between contraceptive and toxin was often dangerously thin. Less harmful Chinese approaches included the use of specific herbal combinations believed to alter fertility, alongside detailed tracking of menstrual cycles, an early form of the rhythm method that required careful observation and record-keeping passed down through generations of women. In the Americas, indigenous populations developed their own independent contraceptive knowledge entirely separate from Old World traditions. Indigenous peoples in what is now the United States and Mexico used plants like Lithospermum ruderaale, commonly known as stone seed, which Shoshone women reportedly used as a long-term contraceptive. Modern pharmacological studies have actually found that this plant does contain compounds capable of disrupting hormonal cycles in animal studies, lending real scientific credibility to oral histories that had been passed down for generations. Wild carrot seed, also known as Queen Anne's lace, was used across multiple ancient cultures, including in parts of India and among some Native American communities, as a postcoital contraceptive. Modern animal studies have found that compounds in wild carrot seed can interfere with progesterone production, a mechanism that would plausibly prevent implantation. This is strikingly similar conceptually to how some modern emergency contraceptives function. Barrier methods in some form appear almost everywhere. Ancient Egyptian men reportedly used linen sheaths, an early precursor to the condom, though historians debate whether this was primarily for contraception or for protection against disease and insects in tropical climates. Animal intestine condoms appear later in the historical record, used in various forms across different cultures, eventually evolving into recognizable predecessors of the modern condom by the 1500s. Withdrawal, what is now called the withdrawal method, appears in some of the oldest religious and medical texts in human history simply because it requires no tools, no plants, and no physician. It is almost certainly one of the very first contraceptive methods ever used by humans, predating any written record at all. So why does any of this matter? Because it tells us something important about ancient people that is easy to forget. They were not passive victims of biology. They were not simply accepting pregnancy as an uncontrollable force of nature. Across wildly different civilizations, separated by oceans and thousands of years with no contact with each other, humans independently arrived at remarkably similar conclusions. Ascetic barriers, hormone-disrupting plants, cycle tracking, withdrawal. The same fundamental problem solved again and again through careful observation, generational knowledge, and a relentless drive to control one of the most powerful biological forces in human life. Many of these methods were dangerous. Some were genuinely effective. All of them prove that the desire to plan, prevent, and control reproduction is not a modern invention shaped by feminism or technology. It is an ancient, universal human impulse, as old as civilization itself. If you want to know more about the fascinating history of human health, subscribe to the Health Archive. Every video is another piece of the puzzle, another civilization, another discovery our ancestors made long before modern science caught up to confirm it. The archive is open. Come explore it.